Santa Monica, California. April 26, 2008, nighttime. Michelle Murphy woke up to a sharp, stabbing pain in her chest and someone big straddling her. In her own home, in her own bedroom. The attacker took a swing, clenching a serrated knife. He was wearing a hoodie and a baseball cap, and it was impossible to make out his face in the dark. It was not a bad dream, Michelle realized. She was being murdered. Michelle fought back. She grabbed the blade, but the attacker didn't let up. Finally, she tucked her legs and thrust them out with all her might. The man was sent flying. He cut his hand. Maybe it was pain that made him snap out of the blood frenzy. "I'm sorry," he said before staggering out. Michelle lived through the experience to testify in court against the attacker. It was Michael Gargiulo, her neighbor, who lived just across the alley, who could see right into her bedroom window. Today, he's mostly known as the boy next door killer, Chiller Killer, the Hollywood Ripper. August 14, 1993, Glenview, Illinois. 18-year-old Tricia Pacaccio was murdered on the back step of her own house. She was found by her father, Rick Pacaccio.
I was the one who found her. I woke up and I had a cup of coffee and I was going out to my van. And I just happened to see two little tennis shoes sticking up by the side door. And when I saw it was her, I dropped the coffee cup.
The police arrived. Tricia's parents collapsed from shock and had to be rushed to a hospital. A small crowd of concerned neighbors gathered outside the Pacaccio's house. But among the crowd, there was one pair of eyes that was not clouded with tears, sadness, or bafflement. Michael Gargiulo was there to watch the aftermath of his doing. Tricia was social and outgoing. She was fun to be around. She was 18 and full of life. The night before, she was coming back from a party. She'd given a ride to a couple of friends and was coming up the steps of her home when somebody jumped at her from the bushes. The assailant left no obvious trace. The police did obtain a DNA sample of an unknown individual at the scene, but they didn't find a match in their forensic database. On top of that, the crime scene wasn't handled properly.
The crime scene back then, I thought it could have been handled a lot better, taped off more.
You think there were mistakes made that day?
Yes.
That hindered the investigation?
I think the crime scene should have been handled a lot better, more secured, yes.
Michael Gargiulo was a shy teenager known for his sudden, violent outbursts. After all, he was in special education for a reason. Still, his friends and neighbors mostly knew him as an ordinary boy next door.
I knew him to be very quiet, one of the guys that were in the back. He was never loud or boisterous whatsoever.
At one point after Tricia's death, Gargiulo started frequenting the Pacaccio family, bringing them gifts. Flowers, greenery, a dinner certificate, even a shirt. It was as if he was atoning for something, for some sin that kept haunting him. The quiet kid, behaving this weird. The Pacaccios alerted the police. There was nothing substantial on Gargiulo. He was as suspicious as any other kid on the block, except for one thing. He'd been arrested for theft before. Gargiulo tried averting the suspicion by pointing at his friend, Eric Agazim, another teenager from the neighborhood. Gargiulo told the police that Agazim had a strange gym bag with him on the morning Tricia's body was discovered, and asked Gargiulo to help him hide it. Gargiulo implied Agazim was trying to conceal a murder weapon. He also attempted to put the blame on Tricia's brother, Doug Pacaccio, whom he was also friends with.
And he looked at me and he said, "If you knew who did this, would you kill them or could you kill them?" I said, "Well, what do you think? Ask any father, any brother, anybody. I think you know the answer." The police called me later on, Detective Jack Reed, and said, "Do you realize that Michael Gargiulo called us and told us that you threatened him?"
One day, Gargiulo showed up at the Pacaccio's doorstep and asked to see Tricia's father, Rick, who was at work at the time. The quiet teenager had been sitting in their kitchen for over an hour when Rick finally showed up. Gargiulo looked at him, obviously wanting to tell him something. But then his own father and sister showed up. With a curt, "Mike, we gotta go," they whisked him away. Nobody knows what Gargiulo wanted to tell Rick that day. Was his father aware of his son's crime and took him away just before he confessed? In 1998, allegedly to escape police scrutiny, Gargiulo moved to LA. He might have gone unpunished if he wasn't craving for more blood. When in LA, Gargiulo was living a veritable Hollywood life. He auditioned for roles, hung out with the local crowd, he partied. He also practiced boxing. In 1999, Temple Brown, a USC film school student, cast Gargiulo as a boxer in his graduate thesis film.
I think he was perfect for that part. He looked it and he performed it very well.
At the time, Gargiulo was working as a bouncer at a Hollywood nightclub called the Rainbow Bar and Grill. In conversations with Anthony DiLorenzo and Tamir Leary, his fellow bouncers, Gargiulo bragged about training to be a pro fighter, how he was modeling and acting. In the words of Leary, doing the Hollywood thing. DiLorenzo and Leary remembered Gargiulo always having lots of women around him. He always had girls after him. He was a good-looking, clean-cut guy. You know, the waitresses were always after him, Tamir Leary, fellow bouncer. Craving a more exciting lifestyle, Gargiulo moved to Hollywood and insinuated himself into the social circle of Ashley Ellerin. Ashley was an aspiring model. She was popular. She was young, charming, and spontaneous. Just like Tricia Pacaccio, she was fun to be around. She was amazing. I mean, she just had this charisma to her. She could go into a room and just take complete control over the room. Justin Peterson, Ashley's friend. Early in the morning, Justin Peterson, a neighbor of Gargiulo and a housemate of Ashley Ellerin, found him sitting in his truck parked just across the street from their house. Gargiulo dropped by the next morning. He told Justin an outlandish story about the FBI being after him, trying to collect his DNA sample. He said he couldn't go home because he had something to do with a case in Chicago. His best friend's girlfriend was murdered, he said. When Justin asked him if he had something to hide, Gargiulo started pulling out a knife strapped to his ankle.
Dude, get out of my house. I don't want to have anything to do with you.
Justin rushed him out. Ashley had it great. She met Ashton Kutcher, the famous Hollywood actor. And he was taking her out to a Grammy party. It was a date. On February 21st, 2001, Ashley was just exiting her bathroom when somebody grabbed her from behind. A knife flashed. Everything turned blood red. Ashton called her but got no response. It was an important night for him. Showing up without a date would look weird, would mean bad gossip. He tried again. Finally, Ashton arrived at Ashley's place. It was brightly lit, but no one answered the door. Ashton peeked inside and saw a big dark red stain on the carpet. Believing it was spilled wine, he left convinced he was stood up. Ashley's body was discovered by her then housemate, Jennifer DeSisto. Ashley was the kind of person to joke around, and I thought it was paint when I approached her, Jennifer DeSisto. Alas, Ashley was dead.
Somebody had isolated Ashley Ellerin to kill her and was very, very angry when he did it. It just was a very bad scene.
Ashley's friends pointed Detective Small to an individual who lived just 400 feet from the victim's place, Michael Gargiulo. He was one of the oddest acquaintances of Ashley. Gargiulo was frequenting a dog park right opposite her house. One time, he was seen just standing on the sidewalk across the street and staring at Ashley's house. He also had an excellent vantage point on the roof of his apartment block. Armed with binoculars, he could easily see inside her bedroom. With the Ellerin case still under investigation, Gargiulo moved again, from Hollywood to the El Monte area of Los Angeles County. In 2002, new DNA technology was developed, and many investigators all across the country were going through cold cases in hopes of finding new leads. The 1993 case of Tricia Pacaccio's murder was brought to light once more. At that point, we began a DNA campaign of everybody, including the Pacaccio family, friends of hers that were with her at the road rally that night. We even tested the dog, Detective Lou Sala. Gargiulo did not want any of it. Just as he did the year before, he tried to evade the investigators. However, the police did manage to obtain his DNA sample. Not without a fight, though. When Detective Sala flew to LA, he contacted Detective Small. The type of attack was similar, the type of victim was similar, the type of weapon, the manner, and method of the attack, the stabbing, the locations, everything is so similar that we all believed it's gotta be our guy. That's when we began to work a parallel investigation. Detective Tom Small. Gargiulo was especially hard to find, for he never seemed to put leases or utilities in his own name. Finally, they tracked him down. He was living with his girlfriend and was absent when the police officers arrived. They had a good look around. Inside Gargiulo's van, they discovered knives, binoculars, and a backpack with a Halloween mask and a handgun. When Gargiulo came home, he was furious. Disregarding the search warrant, he lunged at the officers and had to be taken to the emergency room. Even more suspicious were his livid tirades. What if my DNA was on a keychain that was left at a crime scene? They can't find my DNA from 10 years ago at a crime scene, can they? What if my hairs were at a crime scene in Chicago? Can they book me for that? Everything was screaming, guilty. On top of that, it was a match. The DNA on Tricia Pacaccio's fingernails were Gargiulo's. Almost miraculously, Gargiulo got off the hook, all thanks to police negligence back in 1993. It was unclear whether the crime scene DNA samples were under Tricia Pacaccio's fingernails or on them. The latter could have meant a casual contact. After all, Gargiulo was friends with Doug and occasionally visited their house. To make things worse, the day before the murder, he gave Tricia a ride. Gargiulo's friend and bandmate, Scott Olson, was with them too. I never saw them touch. That's what I could testify to, said Olson to the police. That day, Tricia met a lot of people, including her boyfriend. She had a good long shower before going out. It was only Gargiulo's DNA that was found on her body. Yet, the charges were dropped. Both the community and the police officers involved were indignant. Here is what a spokesperson for the Cook County State's Attorney had to say. We understand and to some extent share those frustrations, but ethical guidelines prohibit the charging of a case without evidence in hand that will enable us to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. It was too great a professional risk for those involved in the case. Another woman had to pay for it with her life. On the night of December 1st, 2005, 32-year-old Maria Bruno got back to her apartment in El Monte. Just a couple of weeks before, she and her husband separated, and Maria moved out. Still, they continued to see each other, trying to patch things up. When Maria moved into her new home in a working-class suburb of LA, she believed it was a safe neighborhood. She was beautiful and was looking to launch her modeling career. But in the course of just a few weeks, she noticed a weird guy watching her. Once, a dark-haired man wearing a hoodie and a baseball cap stealthily followed her inside her apartment. When Maria swung around, he backed away. "Okay, I'm leaving," he said, and was gone. At one point, a neighbor noticed a similarly looking man trying her doorknob before moving on. That fateful December night, she'd been out drinking with her husband, Irvin Bruno. Irvin walked her home, and when he left, Maria collapsed on her bed and was fast asleep. The next morning, Irvin dropped by to give Maria a lift. He noticed a window screen lying on the ground in Maria's apartment. The window was open. Irvin rushed inside and discovered his wife's mutilated body. It was only years later that Maria Bruno's death would be linked to the murders of Tricia Pacaccio and Ashley Ellerin. In 2008, when Michelle Murphy fought off her attacker, the police found a trail of blood leading out of her apartment and into an alley nearby. The officers collected a blood sample and submitted the DNA to the National Police Database. A month later, they got a match. It exceeded everyone's expectations. It was the blood of Michael Gargiulo. On June 6, 2008, the police arrested Gargiulo for attempted murder. Little did they know what rabbit hole they were plunging into. Acting on a hunch, Mark Lilienfeld, an LA detective, decided to look back on Maria Bruno's case. The killer left just one piece of evidence, a blue surgical bootie stained with Bruno's blood. A quick check revealed that Gargiulo lived in the same apartment building at the time of the murder. More than that, he lived just across from Bruno's place and also had a good vantage point. He could easily observe Bruno's apartment standing by the railing outside his own front door. The apartment was vacant. Detective Lilienfeld discovered it had an attic, and what he found there was a matching blue bootie sealed in a plastic bag. the booty with Gargiulo's DNA on it. 3 years later, Anthony DiLorenzo and Tamir Leary, the bouncers who had worked with Gargiulo in LA, were watching an episode of 48 Hours, a CBS true crime series. It was the Boy Next Door episode, detailing the cases of Bruno and Ellerin and the unsolved murder of Tricia Pacaccio. It featured Michael Gargiulo, their pal from the past. The men grabbed their phones. They remembered Gargiulo bragging. He told tall tales on how he could easily evade the police, how he knew how to kill people and remain undetected, how he admired the anarchist cookbook. At one point, he told DiLorenzo that he killed a girl in his hometown and left the bitch on the step for dead. Leary heard the same story, with the addition of one crucial detail. Gargiulo said that he'd stabbed up the girl. Finally, the Cook County State's attorney charged Gargiulo with the first-degree murder of Tricia Pacaccio. But it was far from over. In 2015, the police released a series of creepy photos. Who was that girl? It was speculated that she might have been an unidentified victim of Gargiulo. After all, when Gargiulo was taken into custody, he said that even if his DNA had been found on 10 dead women, it didn't mean he was the murderer. With the case still unraveling, it sounded extremely suggestive.
DNA does not prove that somebody committed a crime. DNA just pretty much says that the person was present or could have been present.
A few months later, Yadira Reyes got a call from her aunt. The woman told her about the photos and the uncanny similarities she bore to the girl. Yadira recognized the man she dated 10 years prior. She also remembered how he'd shoved her into his van and sexually assaulted her, complete with threats to keep her from talking. Yadira ended up testifying in court. So did Michelle. So did the victim's relatives and friends, including Ashton Kutcher. A number of witnesses noticed how he was seeking the attention of the women he murdered, how he called them beautiful. "She'll be mine," he said, referring to Michelle Murphy. Was it bottled up jealousy? The inability to get what he wanted? The common traits of the cases were the close proximity of the crime scene to the killer's lodgings and his abnormal brutality. As Detective Small put it, it suggested a lot of anger. Where did it come from? Was Gargiulo so envious of his victims' lifestyles? Was the shy person in him craving the attention and love they were getting? Was it their lifestyle that made him seethe with rage? Forensic psychologist Dr. Castellano was paid a staggering amount of $300,000 for diagnosing Gargiulo with dissociative identity disorder. A diagnosis that was torn to shreds by the assistant district attorney, Dan Ekman, and the prosecution's own forensic psychologist, Dr. Robert Shug. The final diagnosis was antisocial personality disorder, something that Gargiulo had a long history of. Despite Dr. Castellano's best efforts, Michael Gargiulo was ruled sane, something Gargiulo himself insisted on. On July 16, 2021, he was sentenced to death. A trial for the murder of Tricia Pacaccio awaits him in Illinois. But how about the unidentified victims Gargiulo alluded to? Is this truly the end of his story? Is it? Really?
I'm 100% innocent.